All right. Well, happy day after Memorial Day. Welcome to the live taping of the 4 and 3 podcast. We'll be getting underway in just a second. And Trey, how was your Memorial Day? Hope everybody out there had a great Memorial Day.
Yeah, it was good. I had a few friends over and had a cookout. It's actually my first cookout at my house. I
There you
I got
go. Congrats.
last fall. So yeah, it was the
Congrats.
inaugural cookout.
Did
So
God,
it
did
was good.
Governor Northam there? Did he come by and
Well, I
check to make
think
sure that you were following all the protocols, the proper distancing measures?
so. Really good news out of Virginia. Like right before the weekend, all of our restrictions are gone.
Oh, how about that?
So
I
yeah,
was
so lucky us.
Yeah, we'll get started in just a second, but I was cracking up watching the NBA playoffs, and I follow the Celtics. And on Friday, they could only have like 5% capacity or something like that, so there was like 1,500 people there. But on Sunday, they were allowed to do full capacity, so it was full house. So Friday, danger. Sunday, no danger. So
Well, I mean, I guess it was the holiday weekend. The
yeah.
holiday made it safe,
Yeah, it made it totally safe to get rolling. So, all right, Well, let's fire up this podcast and get it going. So we will hop right in. Here we go. Stand by.
Faithwire.com.
Hello and welcome to 4 and 3, a podcast breaking down 4 of the most important stories of the day and 3 things you need to know about them, all from a Christian perspective. Today is Tuesday, June 1st, 2021. I'm Dan Andros. Coming up on the podcast today, COVID variants are getting new politically correct names. There's a problem with those PC names, though. We'll have that coming up. And video of the Black Lives Matter founder has surfaced with controversial comments made about Israel. We'll have the details there. Bill Maher with a vigorous defense of Israel. We'll have that. And also a teacher punished for standing up for God's truth in the transgender debate. So we'll have all these stories and more. Trey Goins-Phillips from Faithwire.com. Trey, happy Tuesday to you.
Happy Tuesday. I can't believe we're already to June.
Yes.
But the further
Wow.
into 2021 that we get, the more impressed I am with Bill Maher, and I'm assuming the more liberals absolutely can't stand him.
It's got to be driving them nuts. Yeah, it is. I mean, he comes out with these takes, and look, I don't agree with Bill Maher a lot of the time, and I'm not going to go, oh, well, now he's suddenly going to agree with all the things I think. But I just appreciate people who are willing to speak their mind, regardless of the, talking points and the marching orders from this side or this side. We just need more people to be okay with having different opinions on different things, gosh. That's why it's refreshing, right? Not because I'm going to agree with Bill Maher tomorrow when he, rips different people or Christians or whatever. I mean, the guy's an atheist, so I'm not going to agree with him on 90% of stuff. But we just need more people that can speak their views and call out nonsense when they see it, and not worrying about, well, this side's going to get mad at me or this side's going to get mad at me. I just think society's going to be better off with more of that.
Yeah, and it's always impressive, I think, the further we get into this kind of like woke culture, I guess, for lack of a better term, just to see free thinking people. It's like, find whatever you believe and be comfortable to speak up about it. So
and let's
I
not
appreciate
cancel
seeing
everyone.
that
Let's not
wherever it
cancel
comes
everyone
from.
and let's not cancel everyone who's who doesn't agree with you. I mean, it seems like these are simple rules for society, but we've made it complicated. So, all right, well, let's dive in here. Story number 1, and we have, if we recall, President Trump was often criticized for calling COVID the Wuhan virus or the China virus, despite it long being the norm to identify a virus by the region in which it emanated from. Spanish flu, even though that one was sort of, not exactly correct, but we did it anyway. West Nile virus, Middle East respiratory syndrome, Zika and Ebola. I mean, that's just naming a few. I mean, it's just common practice. But now that Joe Biden's in office, apparently there wasn't much thought given by anyone to naming the COVID variants by the region in which they were popping up. And we saw that happening. All of a sudden, it was okay again. The UK variant, the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, the Indian variant, et cetera, et cetera. But now somebody has caught on after being called out for the double standard there, and the WHO has decided that it's time to name the variants using letters from the Greek alphabet. So the UK one will be B.1.1.7, just rolls right off the tongue. The South African one would be B.1.351. You get the idea. They're just going down the line there. And so the WHO said, this was their explanation, while they have their advantages, these scientific names can be difficult to say and recall and are prone to misreporting. As a result, people often resort to calling variants by the places where they are detected, which is stigmatizing and discriminatory. And so the decision to go for this naming system came after months of deliberations with experts, considering a range of other possibilities, such as Greek gods. Now, I don't want to point out the obvious here, but what about the Greeks? I mean, they got to be a little upset here, right? If we're all offended by being named after these things, how come no one cares about the Greeks? We're just going to throw the Greeks under the bus there. So, and as an Andros, I take exception to this. But what's the left saying with this? The left began by not thinking twice about this, with most media outlets calling it the Wuhan virus. But once Trump began to say it, they decided it was bigoted, racist, etc., and they criticized the move. So what's the right saying? Well, the right's generally not been in favor for policing language such as this, and they don't believe, these so-called spikes in Asian hate crimes are the result of Trump's language on this. So why does it matter? Well, it matters because, political correctness, quite honestly, is a disease. And when you can't say things that are true or just simple statements of facts due to political correctness, language and ultimately, Trey, populations can be easily manipulated and controlled.
Yeah. And, this letter thing is just so bizarre. Nobody, I don't think, is actually going to.
No, who's going to sit there and go, hey, you hear about the B.7.1? It's just not. It's not.
They're going to talk about it based on where it came from.
Yeah.
That's just normal. That's what we have always done up until Trump was president. So it just seems so silly. And like you said, it just is. I think it's indicative of the political correctness issue that's just really is kind of invading every single sphere of our lives. And it's just, it's not really helpful. And in other cases, it's just frustrating. Like this is just absolutely frustrating. And I think it's just going to lead to more people being, rolling their eyes and, whatever, we're going to do what we're going to do.
Yeah. And where does it end? You're just not going to be able to say anything at some point. Someone, if we have to worry about these so-called offenses and being offensive to things, I really think, we're finding things to be offended at here in a lot of these cases. Sometimes things are truly offensive. I get it. But a lot of these things is like you're stretching. It's just, when a variant of the virus is popping up in Brazil and it's all over the place in Brazil, but nowhere else, I think it would be helpful to call it the Brazilian variant, because you could talk to scientists in Brazil about what they're finding there, and it just would narrow it down. But instead they think, well, you're going to meet someone from Brazil and beat them up because they have a variant. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's just where we're at as a culture right now, apparently.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there is a reason we call a scientific reason or like a safety reason we call them based on where they came from, because it gives people information about where it came from, so they know, okay, I'm not going to travel to this place, or maybe we need to limit access to this place for a certain period of time. So it makes a lot of sense why we call diseases, based on their origins. So anyway, enough about that frustrating story. So story number 2. So Patrisse Cullors, she's the embattled co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. We've talked about her here before. She once called for an end to Israel, describing the Jewish state as an imperialist project. Cullors made the comments during a 2015 panel discussion called Globalizing Ferguson, Racialized Policing and International Resistance. It was hosted by Harvard Law School, and here's a portion of what she said.
The other thing I'll say is Palestine is our generation South Africa. And if if we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project that's called Israel, we're doomed.
So she also urged people to support the anti-Semitic boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, which is a movement designed to economically and diplomatically cripple Israel. I mean, one of its founders said that he is completely and categorically against a two-state solution because, he said, it assumes that there are two nations with equal moral claims to the land. Colors even encouraged those at the forum to support Razmia Odeh, a convicted terrorist sentenced by Israeli courts to life in prison for a bomb attack that left 2 students dead. She was released in 1980 as part of a prisoner exchange, and then she went on to commit immigration fraud in the United States, which she was convicted of in 2014, so she's no longer a U.S. citizen either. And what's the left saying? Well, last month, the official Black Lives Matter movement tweeted its commitment to ending settler colonialism in all forms amid the continuing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, which is led by the terror group Hamas. The BLM said it will always side with the Palestinians, and the media immediately came to defend Black Lives Matter, clarifying that the organization is not at all siding with Hamas, but is only siding with the Palestinians. So what's the right saying? Well, conservatives have been really critical of Colors, who recently resigned from her role at BLM after news broke that she purchased 4 homes amid all of the rioting and protesting that was taking place across the United States, while also outwardly promoting socialism and Marxism. They've also been critical of BLM and the BDS movement, arguing that both are anti-Semitic. So why does it matter? Well, that clip is from 2015, but it certainly helps to clarify, Dan, where at least the founders of BLM stand on Israel and on the latest conflict with Gaza.
Yeah.
It just kind of reaffirms that people need to be doing their own research about the groups and the movements that they get involved in and that they support, particularly if they plan to give money to them, because they should know where their money is going. And it gets kind of tricky because a lot of big corporations right now, like Target or whatever, are donating money to BLM or have donated money to BLM. So I'm not saying you need to boycott all these places, but just be aware of where your cash could be going.
Yeah.
Because there's some really nefarious stuff, I think, happening, and not always with bad intentions, but because people are kind of ignorant about what these groups are doing a lot of times. But the founders kind of are being pretty honest about where they stand on these issues.
Yeah, and I think you got to, you got to wonder about why she's stepping down now. I get a feeling that we're going to be seeing more video clips like this one. Now, remember, this is a self-described trained Marxist. So all you have to do is just go look at what typical Marxists believe, and you'll get an idea of where she's coming from. So it's not a surprise to see that video comes up of her, calling for an end to Israel, because Marxists view the world with oppressors and oppressed, and they would view Israel as an oppressor, which defies all common sense and logic given the history of Israel and Jews, especially in the last 100 years. I mean, that is insanity. But to your point there, Trey, looking at the history of, not just those comments there, but if you look at what also she mentioned in there, she mentioned support and saying it was very important for them to support. And I don't have her name in front of me, but she was an activist and a convicted terrorist who was convicted for her part in 2 bombings there. And that terrorist who she wants to support was part of the revolutionary Marxist group Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That group said a few years ago that Hamas is a vital part of the Palestinian national movement, and this is the position of PFLP. That's the terror group. So open express support of Hamas, and they themselves, of course, are terrorists, and you have her on tape supporting this stuff. So I'm not surprised she stepped down, because I would not be shocked that if we're going to see more videos like of this coming, because she probably couldn't have predicted that her movement, her organization would have gained this level of mainstream popularity.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to me. I mean, the woman, the terrorist that you're talking about, I mentioned. So the left will define her as this activist who's just talking, for Palestinian liberation.
Yeah.
I've read several pieces about how she's really just this wonderful activist. But like I said, she's a terrorist.
Yeah.
She's guilty of killing two students in the bombing. And the United States has pulled her citizenship because she was committing immigration fraud in 2014. Like, she's not a fair actor or a good person here. But that's just the way that the left will frame these things. And a lot of times it's the way the media will frame them too.
Yeah. Yeah. Shocking stuff. And, you'd think a lot of people, if they don't do their own reading, as you mentioned, are going to fall for this stuff. But Bill Maher is not one of those people, and he is the feature here in story number 3. He offered a vigorous defense of Israel in the face of calls, once again, calling Israel oppressors, violent, murderers, etc. after the latest Israeli-Gaza conflict. And he addressed a lot of the common sort of narratives and tropes surrounding Israel's supposed violations, but he held particular disdain for the idea that Israel stole the land they currently have. Check out his response to that.
What if Canada fired 4,000 rockets into America, or Mexico, which is an even better analogy because we actually did steal the land from Mexico? I would submit that Israel did not steal anybody's land. This is another thing I've heard the last couple of weeks, words like occupiers and colonizers and apartheid, which I don't think people understand the history there. The Jews have been in that area of the world since about 1200 BC, way before the first Muslim or Arab walked the earth, 1,000 years before. I mean, Jerusalem was their capital. Okay, so if it's just about who got there first, it's not even close.
Yeah, and so that is a defense you really don't hear a lot of times, especially from the left. So he went on to say that you can't learn history from Instagram. There's just not enough space. He also showed a map of the United Nations partition plan of 1947, which, as he argued, had it not been rejected by the Palestinians and other Arab neighbors, it would have created 2 states, one for Palestinians and one for Israelis, despite the fact that Israel has not stolen this land, as Maher mentioned. He also criticized celebrities for their half-baked hot takes on Israel, calling Bella Hadid's take out, saying that if she had to live under Hamas, who he pointed out won't let women travel alone, she and her friends would run screaming to Tel Aviv if they had to live in Gaza for one day. And he mocked progressives for thinking that that type of suppression of women, just one rule there. Obviously, LGBT suppression, a huge thing in Gaza. And he is saying, how is this the side of progressives, was the argument that Bill Maher made. So he also pointed out that Hamas fired 4,000 rockets into Israel and pointed out, what should they have done? And he asked that question to panelist and New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof, who didn't really have much of an answer there for what they should have done. So what's the left saying? Well, the left's long targeted Israel, placing them in the occupiers category, calling them oppressors, which is kind of, again, as I mentioned in your story, Trey, is kind of insane given what happened to the Jews over the past 100 years in particular. I mean, we all know the Holocaust, and apparently our memories are short. So what's the right saying? Well, the right, especially Christians, have long supported Israel for reasons we've discussed on this podcast, Trey. And so why does it matter? I mean, it's just plain and simply, truth matters. And the media often distorts this particular conflict. And Israel matters. Again, as we've talked about, God chose to make Israel special. It's a holy land. It's where Christ came down and humbled himself as a child and, to earth. And so everything that matters there, again, Genesis 12, should matter to Christians.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with Maher's point there.
Yeah.
So, if we're going to go with whoever comes first gets dibs on the land, I guess,
Yeah.
I guess the Israelis have quite the leg up there on the land. But it's interesting to see Maher taking such a bold stance. One of the only other celebrities that I've seen who has been so outspoken, and nowhere near that outspoken has been Gal Gadot, the Wonder Woman star, because she is Israeli, so she will periodically post things on social media, in support of her country, and so she has family who still live there. So I'm glad to see when people are willing to do that, particularly celebrities, because they kind of, whether we like it or not, because they have platforms and they're big names, they kind of make it okay, at least in some circles, to express support. So I think it's important for them to use their platforms to do that, because they kind of normalize it. It shouldn't be something that needs to be normalized, but in our day and age, it seems like it is. So I'm glad when celebrities are willing to do that.
Yeah. And she was in the IDF, right? Gal.
Yeah, she was for 2 years.
Yeah, because I know it's part of Israel over there that when you have to do that service for a couple of years. So it's kind of interesting to see. Again, I was over there in 2018 watching when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and when we were down near the Gaza border, just reporting on the conflict that was going on there, the guards at the road that led up to the fence there were they had stationed. It was two, I don't know, 17 or 8. I don't know what their minimum age is, but teenage looking girls. And they were sitting there, and you saw a lot of that around there, young girls that looked like they would be in college or something here. And they're just out in full uniform with the machine guns, and they're sitting there. They were just kind of killing time because there wasn't much going on, and they're taking selfies, posting them on Instagram. And that's just a side note, but it was just really interesting to see that dynamic is there for Israel. But you can understand why someone like Gal Gadot then would be, they took part in this. They saw all this stuff. They're not just, growing up in, out in the suburbs with no stake in it. So, interesting dynamic there.
And it's so sad to see that, her name was trending on social media after she posted that caption, that tweet. She's talking about this when she has her own family members who are in bomb shelters right now.
Yeah.
And her name is trending on Twitter though, because people are launching all kinds of anti-Semitic attacks against her just for speaking out in support of her own family, not just the country, but family members who still live there. So it's a tough place to be in, I think, in our culture right now, where it's so, hated to be supportive of Israel. But we need more people like Maher and Gal Gadot and whoever to stand up and do it.
Indeed.
So, all right, story number 4. So a Christian physical education teacher in Northern Virginia has been suspended after he said he will never lie to a student by affirming a person can be any sex other than that which corresponds with his or her biological makeup. So Tanner Cross, he spoke at a Loudoun County School Board meeting in Virginia to oppose a new policy within LCPS that requires all staff to use students' preferred pronouns and to allow transgender students to participate in school and sports activities, however they identify, regardless of their biological sex. He began his brief remarks by saying he was speaking out of love for those who are suffering with gender dysphoria. He said that he thinks the policy change will damage children and defile the holy image of God. He said, "I love all my students, but I'll never lie to them, regardless of the consequences. I'm a teacher, but I serve God first, and I will not affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa, because it's against my religion. It's lying to a child, it's abuse to a child, and it's sinning against our God." So the policy in question states that school staff shall, at the request of a student or parent or legal guardian, when using a name or pronoun to address a student, use the name and pronoun that corresponds with their gender identity. It goes on to say that those who intentionally and persistently refuse to respect a student's gender identity by using the wrong name and gender pronoun are in violation of this policy. Obviously, it's referring to whatever gender identity the child chooses to use. After the meeting, Cross was actually placed on leave, I think the day after, from his job at Leesburg Elementary School. So what's the left saying? Well, this is particularly, a practice is particularly increasingly embraced by those on the left, who argue that this is all about inclusion, although ironically it's to the exclusion of people like Cross. There are some liberals, though, who have spoken out against some of these extremes. Bill Maher has actually been one of them, has spoken out against some of the extremes of this kind of woke ideology. And what's the right saying? Well, conservatives have been opposed to these broad sweeping policies from day one, particularly as it comes to the transgender issue, because it has in effect eliminated spaces for females. We've seen J.K. Rowling speak out about that, as well as others who have talked about how it's literally erasing spaces that were designed for females. And that's been a lot of the criticism from conservatives. So why does it matter? Well, I think Cross is expressing a mainstream Christian view, and he's being punished for it. He's also expressing a view that fits perfectly within biological science, Dan, which I think is the even bigger point, because he's being punished for literally siding with what we know to be true biologically.
Yeah.
So I think as Christians, the takeaway here is that we have to be willing to stand our ground both compassionately, but also uncompromisingly, because I think these debates are only going to get even starker. And I think Christians need to be willing to stand their ground on these issues because they matter. God created us in his image in two sexes, male and female. We can talk about that all day. We've said that before. But there's a reason he created us that way. The science backs up the fact that he created us that way. And Christians need to be willing to take a stand on that.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken here, Trey, he got in trouble for saying this at a school board meeting, right? Like he wasn't like out there, purposely deriding some transgendered students, right? They were just talking about this as an issue with pertaining to the policy, right?
Yeah, so he went to the school board meeting and he told the board, he opposes the policy because of his Christian faith, and he wasn't attacking a student in particular, but he did say that he would not follow that policy because he sees male and female as created by God distinctly, and he laid it out compassionately. He even said that I want to care for the students who may have gender dysphoria. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go against what I know to be true from Scripture. Yeah. And for that, he was placed on leave.
Yeah, and that's to me insane, is that he just talked about this policy and then gets
hypothetically.
Like you didn't even get to see how it would play out in school. Like, oh gosh,
right.
You can't even speak against this stuff without getting punished. That is some pretty chilling stuff right there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, that it was a hypothetical conversation. Like this wasn't something that's been lived out. It hasn't happened in the classroom, at least anything that's been reported. It was literally, he was just saying, I'm opposed to this policy and here's why. Yeah. And simply for being opposed to it, he was placed on leave, which if that's not a clear-cut case of religious discrimination, I'm not certain what would be.
Yeah. I mean, what did he violate here? Just the feelings of the people in the school board meeting? I mean, that's just madness right there. That's just madness. But again, we've talked about it, Trey. I think we're going to just see this sort of language policing only ramp up. And, it's going to take brave people like this teacher right here to sort of jump into the crossfire here, or else, you're going to lose your right to say these things if people don't speak up in their spheres of influence where they can. It's just the logical conclusion. And so it might be painful for some people like this teacher, but, God bless him for, having the conviction of his values and his views and his faith to realize I might get punished for this personally, but it's worth standing up for. And honestly, all people should celebrate that. Anyone who's standing up for their convictions should, at least be respected for that. And, unfortunately, it doesn't look like he is, but hopefully others will follow in his footsteps and stand up for what they believe in, and so that their views can be had and can be heard.
Yeah. And I think, it's going to take more people like him standing up to kind of burst the bubble, because we've created this bubble of where we use the word inclusion and tolerance, but we actually mean the exact opposite. Yeah. We mean intolerance and we mean exclusion, usually of conservatives and most certainly of Christians. So it's going to take more examples like these to show that actually the inclusion that we're promoting as a secular society isn't actually any sort of inclusion at all. So we need more people to stand up and kind of reveal that to people, because their eyes certainly need to be open to that.
Yeah, 100% agree. And, we'll be praying for that, certainly. So that is all the time we have for this episode of 4 and 3. Follow us on all the channels as usual, but head on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective, and it's sorely needed now, and you're just not going to find a lot of sources that put God first. We do, and we do so every single day. So God bless you. We will see you back here tomorrow. All right. We are clear on the taping. So back in the saddle. And sorry, by the way, I missed... I was switching around like the pictures or something, and I must have missed you mention that in that story.
Oh, yeah.
The terrorist woman.
The terrorist.
Black Lives Matter support. So sorry about that. I thought, I didn't realize that it had already been mentioned. But
no, but I mean, it's just, it's crazy to me. Like the support that she has to get, but it's like, it's completely unacceptable to support Israel or to voice any sort of support for Israel. But please support this woman who's a convicted terrorist. Please support the BDS movement, which is known to be anti-Semitic. It's just, I don't know. It boggles my mind.
Imagine feeling comfortable. And now, again, that was 2015. So, she had not risen to the level of prominence that she has today. She only had one house back then, probably. Now she's got 4.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I really do think that there's a good chance that is why she stepped down there. Because what earthly motivation could she possibly have for stepping down? Like, she's been doing this her whole, she created this thing. It's her baby. And it finally takes off within the last year. And it's like, wow. Now we've made it. We've got all these companies and organizations, donating to Black Lives Matter and sending us millions of dollars. We are the pinnacle of racial justice. And so when they say we're donating to anti-racism, a lot of it's going to BLM. Yeah. And they finally get there, and then she steps down. Like, I mean, maybe she's just content with the 4 houses. I'm assuming she's got mortgage payments on those houses coming. So it seems kind of surprising that she would just step down, but I honestly think, because remember, they backtracked on their about page when people discovered that they were against the nuclear family. Odd position to have. Not for a cultural Marxist. They are not for the traditional family for reasons that make sense when you look at their ideology and what they're trying to break down culture and America and rebuild it back up as a Marxist society. Again, she's trained Marxist. That's her views, but that's what Marxists want to do. They have to kind of deconstruct culture first before they can rebuild it in the way they want to, in a Marxist way. So that's just how these trained Marxists think. And so you can only imagine the videos that are out there. I knew there would be a video when we talked last week, Trey, about that story that we were going back and forth with Facebook on, and the fact checkers and effectively supporting Hamas, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, given her Marxist leanings, it's just a matter of time before stuff like this starts coming out, and I'm sure there's more of them. Because just look up what Marxists believe about Israel and Palestine and Hamas, and you're not going to find a lot of criticism of Hamas in there.
Yeah, and I think one of the most frustrating things as a Christian is we obviously want to stand up against racism, but we live in a society now where it's kind of a binary. It's like the only way to stand up to racism is to support BLM. Right. And if you're not fully on board with BLM, then you support racism. And it's like, that's, as a Christian, I know that's not true. That's fundamentally not true. Totally. The gospel is where we can find solutions to racism. I'm not saying that all of the answers are right in Scripture, but all of the principles are. Yeah. And if we apply the principles of Christ, we apply the principles of the Old and New Testament, we can find ourselves in a place that is not, we're anti-racist, I guess, whatever that word means. But, we would be opposed to racism. We can find all of those solutions in Scripture. So you don't have to be fully on board with BLM to oppose racism and to support justice. Yeah,
no, 100%. And you just have to think a lot of these companies that are jumping onto this, anti-racism sort of campaign, normally companies want to avoid these sorts of controversial topics, but it seems they've made the calculation that it's like getting woke insurance or something, you know, like I just don't want to be, you know, the target of the next campaign from one of these sites that tries to target companies who aren't woke enough, who don't have the anti-racism training. We want to show that we're doing the work. And so they do that. And like you said, like, you don't have to be pro these groups to be anti-racism. I mean, I think 99.9% of companies and employees out there don't want to be racist. And if they saw blatant racism in the workplace, they would call it out. Now, the problem is a lot of these anti-racist groups just say that there's inherent racism in everything. And if you're white, you're racist. You know, that's what, you know, Robin DiAngelo in her book, that's basically what it says. So that's where people have the problem, is when you start just calling everything racist and saying, well, all these systems are racist. And so now you just, every single thing that happens is a result of this racism. And I don't think that that's a proven view. And I don't think it's a theory. I mean, you know, critical race theory. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a battle that is fought, and it's frustrating because it just feels like dividing, because we're, again, aside from the handful of actual racists out there, we're all against racism. I think we could all unite on that. Like, nobody wants to be a racist. That's how they're getting people to join on these anti-racism campaigns, as flawed as they are. Because we're all so they're taking an issue that 99.9% of Americans are united on, and they're dividing us over it. Like,
and I think the really troubling side of it is that it's creating a problem without a solution, right? Like, if everybody is inherently racist, then everything is racist. There is no redemption. There's no path forward with critical race theory, because there's no way to eliminate it. And the difference is, with Christians, I suppose you could say that we believe in systemic sinfulness, but with Christianity, there is a path to redemption, through Jesus Christ. There is an exit ramp. And that's the difference, and in that systemic sinfulness, there's racism and all kinds of other stuff. But like I said, there's a path out. There's a path toward redemption. And with CRT in a secular world, there is no path. There's no off ramp. There's no way out. Everything will always fundamentally be racist and immoral. And I don't know how someone is supposed to work with that. I don't know how someone is supposed to find a solution with that. I just hope as Christians we will infuse the gospel into these conversations as much as we can, because that's the only way out. As believers, we know that to be true. That the transformation of the Holy Spirit is the only way that someone can get out of their sinfulness. And CRT, no theory or course or educational program, whatever, none of that is going to do that for you.
Yeah. And Tim Keller posed a question in a big breakdown he did on critical theory and critical race theory, and he kind of explained out how he thought it was, defined by people, and it was a really thoughtful sort of I guess like a paper or something that he wrote. But he posed the question. He was, which I think is a very good question, and I have not heard anyone answer this on the anti-racism side. And they break the world down into two groups: oppressors or the oppressed. And so he asked the question, well, what happens when these oppressed groups they succeed? Like, let's say they succeed in their goal, hypothetically, and they're no longer oppressed. Well, under their worldview, you can only have oppressor and oppressed. So are they now the oppressor? If they're no longer being oppressed, are they the oppressor? And so, like you said, there's no vindication, there's no grace, there's no we've made it. Like there's none of that in this. So it's like, his point was, well, if you follow the worldview the way you've structured it, then it's just going to be a repeating cycle. Well, great, you're no longer oppressed. Well, congratulations, you're the oppressor now. And so now we're fighting you. Is that what we do? Do we turn around and say, well, this group made it, they're no longer oppressed. All right, they're the oppressor, let's go get them. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It falls apart on its face when you really analyze this stuff down. And Tim Keller has done that. you know, he's the guy to do it. I'm not the guy to do it. He's a billion times smarter than I'll ever be. But I would encourage anybody to go read that. Look up Tim Keller's kind of exposition on critical theory, and it's worth the read. So,
for sure.
All right, I'm going to hit stop button here, Trey, and then we'll see. We'll see how long it takes it to stop. But thank you all for being here. God bless you. We'll see you all back here tomorrow.